Sam texted and said, I'm wide open. What you got? And I just sent back CCR. And he said, if that is a biblical test, I have failed. I said, no, it's a musical test. So he goes, I got that. I still failed. I don't know what to do with it. So I explained a little bit, and it boils down to, there's that theme. It's about Him. God at the center of everything I am and everything I do. And today, God at the center of my GPS in the way that I think. Where does my mind end up? My GPS in my car. Where does it take me? And so we're going to evaluate that, kind of take some inventory today and make some connections. Let's start with this. I want you to understand that we have no misunderstanding. There is evil in this world. It is a scary place. It has existed in this world since the garden, and it will continue to exist until the Lord returns. Satan is active. Satan and his messengers are varied. They can appear as angels of light, or they can be very blatant in their evil. They prowl about like roaring lions seeking someone to devour. They're constantly involved in our world. And so we have to be careful. Our world can be scary. We protect ourselves. You know, there are certain parking lots maybe that we avoid. Do not go into alone at night because of a reputation or a past event or just out of safety. We protect our kids. We tell our kids, warn them there are places that they will avoid. There are places you are not allowed to be. Do not let me catch you there. Do not let your GPS show up that that's where you're at. We protect our spouses. More than once, I have gone to Walmart at night, either by myself or with my wife, because she's not going by herself. Especially our Walmart with its national reputation. We actually look out for total strangers. You know, you're walking through Walmart and maybe you see some girls that are unattended by an adult, and you see someone suspicious. We begin to watch. My child, for whatever reason, he has his face buried in his hands, and Jake is laughing, has developed this thing where you're driving down the road and he rolls down the window and he screams, "Help, I've been kidnapped." And sometimes I yell, "Help, that's my child, please come get him," that kind of thing. But one day we're in Walmart, and he and another boy as big as he, I couldn't have kidnapped them at gunpoint. They would have whipped me, all right? We are standing in the health and beauty, and my child goes, "Help, I've been kidnapped." And this employee goes, well, he and CJ wander off, and this employee, doing his job, doing his due diligence, follows me for 2 rows through there. So we get that it's a dangerous world, and so we look out for each other, even people we've never met. And at times, we're thankful for that. At times, it does intervene. At times, it protects us. Just having someone notice that this is a little sketchy and be in the vicinity. So we know there's places we avoid. We know that's true with our mental GPS. We know that there are movies that our mind should not take us to. There are books that our mind should not take us to. Sites that we are to avoid. That's the obvious part. All right, and that's part of the connection to CCR. I see the bad moon arising. I see trouble on the way. I see earthquakes and lightning. I see bad times today. Don't go around tonight. It's bound to cost your life. And so there are things that we know that we avoid because they are inherently dangerous or scary or evil. But that's the obvious. And very quickly, running through how to deal with the obvious, be careful. He describes us as being sober-minded. Innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. Don't put ourselves in those situations. Be choosy. Be choosy about where you go. Be choosy about friendships. Be smart. A lot of the evil in our world is able to prey on ignorance or stupidity. Be diligent. Just pay attention. Since this is the obvious part, I would think for the most part, hopefully, Hebrews chapter 5, we are mature enough to know the difference between right and wrong. So we try to avoid the obvious. We avoid the places that we should not be. They're not even in our physical GPSs. They're morally abhorrent. We're not headed to the strip club. We're not headed to the crack house. And if that's all there was to this, for most of the spiritually mature, it'd be pretty easy. So let's talk about the less obvious. Let's talk about the places that are not even necessarily inherently wrong, but can serve as a distraction or a time dominator or a money dominator that end up revealing that I have a focus other than God at the center. There are actually some of those in Scripture. The first one is in Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. Jesus saw a crowd around him. He gave orders to depart to the other side. What's the context? The context is a centurion being commended, diseases being cured, Peter's mother-in-law being cured, everybody in town coming 16 and 17 to be cured. And so they are seeing the power of Jesus. He is revealing himself to them. And he's going to move on to the next place. And as he does, a scribe came to him and said, I will follow you wherever you go. I've seen the evidence. I want to buy into this. The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Are you sure? Have you counted the cost? And another said to him, Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father. Jesus said, follow me. Allow the dead to bury their own dead. Is there anything inherently wrong with making a funeral arrangement for your dead father? No. What's Jesus talking about? He's talking about timing. He's talking about, I'm here, I'm now, I need a commitment. Where is your GPS going to take you at this moment? Is it going to take you to something that should be second, but you're about to make it first, or are you going to follow me? Similar context in Luke chapter 9, verses 61 and 62. Hey, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, but I need to go and say goodbye at home. No. You're going to put your hand to the plow, don't look back. If you're going to make the verbal commitment to me at this point, punch me into your GPS and go with me now. Is there anything inherently wrong with family? Not at all. The law included love your father and mother, take care of them. The new law includes a man is worse than an infidel if he does not take care of his own household. Luke chapter 14, another text. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 15. They're reclining at the table. One of them sitting there, blessed is everyone who eats bread in the kingdom of God. And so Jesus said, all right, I got your attention. Now let's talk. A certain man's giving a dinner and he invited many. The hour came. He sent out the slaves. Remember how this works. You get an invitation, you respond, I'm coming to your house to eat, and that invitation is understood that when I get ready, I will let you know, and you have already committed, you're coming to eat with me, so then you arrive on my schedule as the master of the house, because I'm the one that set the timetable. And the slaves go out and they get things like, well, I bought some oxen. And the idiocy of the idiot nature of buying ox that you've never seen or tested. But anyway, I got to go see if they can plow. All right, I bought some land. I got to go look at it for the first time. This kind of thing. Is there anything wrong with buying cattle? No, not at all. Is there anything wrong with buying land? No. Is there anything wrong with funeral arrangements or checking on the family? No. But it's the issue in every one of these stories about what those things are replacing. They are replacing the presence of Jesus in their lives. I want to go with you, Jesus, but I don't want to go until it's convenient for me, until I've done everything else that's on my to-do list, until I've gone everywhere else my GPS is going to take me. I wanted to come to the feast, but now I got some cows. I got some oxen. I've got some land I got to check on. So, begin to make some connection. Think about where, if you went home and downloaded the data in your GPS, on your car, on your phone, on your watch, what might it show? Have you ever noticed that if you watch crime shows, one of the things they do if they're trying to find a body is they download the information in the GPS? How long was that last trip? It might not show exactly where they went, but they know it's within a 15-mile radius or whatever. So the information's in there. And if you're punching in addresses, the information's in there. What would yours show? Would it show that I can make it to the gym to work out 5 or 6 days a week, but I've never stopped at a widow's house? Would it show that I've made it to work on time every day I've been employed, but I've never been to worship on time? Would my GPS show that I can make it early to work for a pre-work meeting, but I don't even know what Bible classes we offer? Would it show that I can make it to the river 3 times a week, but I've never slowed down long enough to cook a meal for someone? Anything inherently wrong with going to the gym? Not at all. Paul says there's a little bit of value in physical exercise. Is there anything wrong with getting to work on time? Not at all. We're supposed to be good stewards. God gave us jobs to take care of our families. Is there anything wrong with recreation? Would my GPS show that I can make it to the mall, or I can make it shopping, I can make it to every practice, I can make it to every game, I can make it to the movies, I can make it to check on my grandkids, or whatever we put into our GPSs, but there's nothing spiritual in my GPS. Worship 3 times a week is too much. I can play, if you play summer ball and you have play dates, we can play 9 ball games in a week's time. But worship 3 times a week, that's too much. In fact, sometimes 3 times a month's too much. Mentoring is too much of a commitment. Why? I'm going to get a little personal for a second. More so than I was. Why, with all the, quote, mature Christians I see here today, does Austin have to come to me and say, we have kids in our Last Leaders program that do not have mentors because I keep getting told no. And yet we can commit to everything else under the sun. Shame on us. We ought to be embarrassed. And we ought to be disgusted with ourselves because we've put everything else in front of the welfare of our spiritual children. Oh, don't ask me to teach. Man, that's too much time. I'd have to study on this day, and I'd have to go up there and prepare, and I'd have to make copies, and then I got to go sit and make a difference in kids' lives. And so Bob has to combine classes and move numbers around because we don't have enough. I make it to the gym 5 days a week to work out. I'm strong as an ox. I've got a good tan because I laid in the tanning bed, but I didn't even know we had a fellowship last week. What would our GPSs say about us? Would it say we've ever made it to our annual singing? And you can put whatever you need to put in that list because you know the list. You know the spiritual things that are available through the congregation here, in your personal lives, through area congregations. And you can see by looking at your GPS what is dominating your time, where your car is taking you, what you are doing versus what you're not doing. Our physical, mental, and spiritual GPSs tell the story. They tell what is important to me. They tell where I go, when I go, how long I stay, and what I don't do. What's important? Listen, let me emphasize again, it's not that these things are wrong. There's room for them if we put God at the center. The question is the timing. The question is, am I doing this instead of the better thing? The question is the amount of time I'm investing. What's being left undone? Priorities. Paul told Timothy that physical exercise had some merit. I already said that. Paul took time to make tents. He had a job. Jesus, this is a fascinating note about John chapter 20, 21. Jesus did not reprimand the disciples for going fishing after his resurrection. In fact, he knew where to find them. He let them fish all night long before he called them back to the task at hand. And then he used the task at hand to remind them, all right, leisure time's over with. You didn't catch anything. Now let me make my point. This is who I am. Let's go. So I check my GPS. And I see what dominates my steps, my miles, my time. And I compare it to my mental, my spiritual GPS. What's my focus? What am I reading? What am I studying? What am I watching? And guess what? You're going to see a correlation. You're going to see a connection that the GPS that's up here begins to dominate the GPS that's out here. And if you identify an imbalance in your spiritual life, I've got a whole lot more time invested in this physical world than I do the spiritual world. I have a whole lot more effort invested in this part of my life than I do that part of my life. I can see that I'm not seeking first the kingdom and letting everything else fill in around it. What's the solution? What is the solution to balancing out my time, my effort, my finances? I'm going to show you something really fascinating. Matthew chapter 12, 33 through 37. Good trees don't produce bad fruit. Bad trees don't produce good fruit. Why, Jesus? I don't understand. Is it not possible that... Well, he said, let me explain. He said, out of the heart of man, out of the treasure of man, of what he's stored up, comes the overflow, what he presents to the world. The words, the attitudes, the things that he does. When I intentionally, there's a key word, control my mental and spiritual GPS. When I intentionally control where my mind goes, what I read, what I watch, what I study, I begin to intentionally control my physical GPS. I begin to intentionally determine the kind of fruit that I produce. And Jesus says that's the only way it works. You can't bring up out of an evil treasure, he says, good things. What I do, what I say, where I go is ultimately determined by what I think. My physical GPS is governed by my spiritual and mental GPSs. The priorities in my life are determined by the priorities in my thinking, in my time investment, in my mind. So, here's a formula, and it's the text I told you we would get to. Philippians chapter 4. Paul is wrapping up the letter. So what often happens in Paul's letters, when he gets to the conclusion, when he gets to that last chapter, he's going to bounce through a lot of things to try to nail these last few thoughts down. And he has started it with what? I long to see my joy and my crown. Stand firm. I'm hoping I get there. Make sure some things are right with you in verse 2. Mend the division. Help them, in fact, mend it. Verse 4, rejoice. Verse 5, let your spirit be your forbearing, the fact that you're patient, be known to all men. The Lord is near. It's going to happen sooner or later. Be anxious. Pray about it. You'll have peace that passes all understanding, based on verse 6. Finally, brethren. All right, I got to wrap some things up. So finally, what are my final thoughts I'm going to give you? Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of a good reputation, if there's any excellence, anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. And so we begin to develop a formula, and Paul says, narrow your thinking down to the good stuff. Don't focus on anything and everything. Don't focus on things that are acceptable but not good. See the difference? Zero in on the right thing. Intentionally govern the intake. Now watch this. I am amazed how many times that verse, Philippians 4 and verse 8, gets quoted without any realization that there's a verse 9. That they're connected. So, govern your thinking and realize that verse 8 is not the end all, because Paul continues and says, when you dwell on the things of verse 8, what's going to happen? They're going to show up in verse 9. They're going to show up in your life. Think on these things now then. Remember that I did those things. Reproduce them. When we think on them, when they dominate our thinking, when we focus on good things, we're going to do good things. When we focus on good places, we're going to go good places. When we focus on service, we're going to serve. When we focus on growth, we're going to grow. When we focus on morality, we're going to be moral. So verse 8, narrow the thinking to the right thing so that in verse 9, they show up and suddenly my physical GPS is on point. I'm not just avoiding the places that are inherently evil. I'm also doing the good things that need to be on my GPS. And I'm avoiding the things that simply distract me. Guess what? My duck's never been to a strip club. My duck's never been to a crack house. He's also never done anything morally right. He's just a duck. I can avoid all of the awful in this world and still never do anything for the cause of Christ. I can avoid all the awful in the world, be dominated only by family or school or whatever, things that are acceptable, and still my GPS be off. So we work on getting our eternal GPSs right. We can avoid that bad moon rising. Whether it's a morally defunct moon or it's just a normal moon that's distracting me. So really quickly, for just a second in your head, download your GPS from last week. Where'd you go? What'd you do? What dominated your time? What filled up most of your calendar so that you're having to try to slide God in the gaps rather than God being at the center and everything else fitting when it needs to? Here's another question. Has your GPS brought you to the waters of baptism? Has your GPS brought you to Calvary? Have you obeyed the gospel? You may be the best human being or best version of yourself you could possibly be. You're morally good and you do good things, and yet you've never been to Calvary in the blood of the Lamb through obedience to the gospel. GPS is off. If you need to make changes this morning, it starts on the inside and then it moves to the outside. And if you need to obey the gospel, it's a simple GPS put because it's 15, 20, 30 feet down this aisle as we stand and sing.